Welcome to the inspiring story of Laura, a woman who, while facing neglect and disregard in a hospital, becomes the force behind a monumental change, all without knowing her husband, Rafael, owns the institution. When Rafael witnesses his wife's suffering and the hospital's care failures, he is compelled to confront the structure he himself created. This narrative reveals the transformation not only of an institution but also of values, reminding us of the importance of dignity, compassion, and the courage to do what's right. Like, subscribe, and stay with us until the end to see how the power of love and justice can change lives. Laura looked around as she held tightly to the edge of the hard chair in the hospital waiting room. The clock on the wall seemed to mock the slow passing of time, and each minute brought a new wave of discomfort. The pain in her back and legs was intense, pulsing with a rhythm that she knew was not a good sign. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but her heart pounded, and the feeling of abandonment grew with each look of indifference she received. The hospital was busy, but something about the place felt cold and mechanical, like a well-oiled machine indifferent to the feelings of the people passing through it. The receptionist in front of her typed something on the computer with a look of complete disinterest, not even bothering to glance up. Laura cleared her throat softly, but the receptionist didn't move. "Excuse me, I really need help," Laura spoke, her voice thick with a mix of pain and anxiety. Finally, the receptionist raised her face, but her gaze was one of impatience. "Have you filled out the admission form, ma'am?" asked the receptionist, her voice icy. Laura nodded and held up the form she had filled out with trembling hands. The receptionist took the paper, glanced at it briefly, and placed it on a pile without a hint of expression. "Just wait. Someone will call you." Laura tried to protest. "But I'm in a lot of pain and I'm pregnant." "Yes, ma'am. Wait in line like everyone else," replied the woman, cuttingly, before turning back to her computer, ignoring Laura's distress completely. Laura leaned back in her chair, trying to find a position that would relieve the pressure on her belly, but the pain was constant. She remembered Rafael's words that morning as he left for an important meeting. "If you need anything, call me," he had said, with that comforting tone that always reassured her. Rafael was always a man dedicated to his work, but he never let Laura feel neglected. Despite being the owner of the hospital, Rafael had never encouraged Laura or any family member to expect privileges. They had always believed they deserved fair treatment, like anyone else. She sighed, trying to dissipate her anguish. But as time passed, the indifference around her only increased her anxiety. A nurse walked by without even looking at her, while a doctor in the distance discussed protocols with the team. The feeling of invisibility mingled with her discomfort, and she began to wonder if anyone there truly cared about the patients. The wait dragged on, and with each attempt to ask for help, Laura received impassive looks or evasive responses. When she finally managed to get the attention of a nurse, she tried to explain that she was in intense pain. "You're in triage, right? Just wait," he responded, almost robotically, before turning his back and walking away. Laura pressed her lips together, holding back tears. She felt increasingly desperate and vulnerable. Around her, people came and went. Some received quick attention, while others, like her, were relegated to the background, trapped in a ruthless cycle of neglect. She knew something was wrong, but there she was, helpless, in a hospital owned by her husband, not even receiving the basics. With tears in her eyes, Laura realized that this place didn't just offer indifferent treatment, it was inhumane. At that moment, she felt an overwhelming weight in her chest, as if her dignity was being stripped away each time her plea for help was ignored. Before we continue with this emotional story, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. This is how you can help us keep bringing powerful stories of justice and overcoming challenges. Click the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you don't miss upcoming stories. Shall we continue? Laura looked around, her vision blurred by tears that refused to fall. She took a deep breath, trying to control her frustration and pain, but her body felt like it was giving up. With determination, she stood and walked to the reception desk once again. She tried to stay calm as she approached, but each step felt heavier, and her breathing became more uneven. "Excuse me, but I need urgent help. I'm in a lot of pain and "My baby," she said, almost in a whisper, trying to convey the seriousness of her situation. This time, the receptionist looked up, but her expression remained cold. "I've already told you, ma'am, you need to wait. There's nothing I can do for you right now." The woman's voice was firm and unyielding, and Laura felt small in the face of such insensitivity. Still, she tried once more, her hand instinctively clutching her belly protectively. "But I'm in constant pain. I think something's not right." Before she could finish, the receptionist interrupted her with an exasperated sigh, turning to a nearby staff member. "Nurse Louise, could you check if there's an available room? We have this woman here who's been waiting." The nurse, a tall man with an apathetic expression, glanced at Laura with a slight eye roll, as if she were being a nuisance. He checked the clipboard in his hand and, after a few seconds of looking at the document, shook his head. "No rooms available right now. If you want, you can sit and wait. Someone will call you," he said, without any sympathy. Laura opened her mouth to protest, but felt that any effort would be futile. Desperation mixed with pain as she returned to her chair, where she sank down, feeling completely helpless. She remembered the doctors and nurses who had attended events with Rafael, always cordial and respectful, but with her, the lack of empathy was almost palpable. Meanwhile, an elderly woman entered the reception area and was almost instantly greeted by another attendant. She wore elegant clothes and carried herself with a sense of authority. The receptionist left her post and rushed over to the woman, guiding her to the care area. The lady didn't even have to wait. She was quickly taken to an available room. Laura watched the scene, feeling a tightness in her chest as she realized the contrast in treatment. Trying to hold back tears, she thought of Rafael again, wondering what he would say if he saw what she was going through. But at the same time, Laura wrestled with the idea of reaching out to him. She didn't want him to solve the problem for her. She only wanted humane treatment, the same that should be offered to anyone in that hospital. An hour later, Laura's pain intensified. She began to sweat, her hands trembling slightly. She knew something was wrong. Her maternal instincts screamed at her, but the silence of the hospital made her doubt herself. Gathering courage, she walked once more to the reception desk, this time determined to be heard. "I really need help. Please, I can't wait any longer," she said, her voice hoarse and thick with emotion. The receptionist looked at her for a moment and then gestured for a nurse. "Take her to the initial exam room. Maybe a doctor will see her afterward." The nurse led her to a small, cold room. She lay down, gripping the side of the bed tightly, trying to control her breathing as she waited for the examination. Minutes later, a doctor entered, adjusting her glasses and looking at Laura's chart without even greeting her. "So, you think you're in pain, is that it?" the doctor asked, without lifting her eyes from the chart. "Yes, doctor. I feel intense pain. Something that doesn't feel normal," Laura replied, keeping her voice low and respectful. The doctor gave a slight, cynical smile. "Ma'am, pregnancy involves discomfort. These pains are normal. Go back to the waiting room and try to relax." Laura felt the tears welling up again. "But I really think that—" "Ma'am, are you a doctor?" the doctor interrupted, her tone verging on mockery. "Because unless you are, I suggest you trust my assessment. You can wait like all the other patients." Feeling humiliated and drained, Laura returned to the waiting room, her face now wet with tears. All she wanted was a proper evaluation, someone who could check if her baby was okay. But in this hospital, with each attempt, her dignity seemed to be stripped away. Laura leaned back in the cold chair of the waiting room, trying to gather her thoughts. The doctor's words still echoed in her mind, each syllable laced with contempt and indifference. It was almost unbelievable that she was there, being treated with such disdain and lack of empathy. She touched her belly gently, feeling the baby's soft movements, but at the same time, the throbbing pain reminded her that something was not right. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm herself, but the frustration was difficult to contain. How had it come to this? Laura had always believed in the goodness of people, but now she felt trapped in a nightmare where she was invisible, worthless. "Why am I being treated like this?" she thought, and a sense of helplessness began to fill her chest. When she opened her eyes, She saw a mother and child entering the reception area. Within seconds, a nurse approached them with a warm smile, guiding them to be seen without any wait. The inequality in treatment was so blatant that it felt like a blow with each new scene. Finally, Laura picked up her phone, considering calling Rafael. She knew he would answer immediately, would likely abandon any meeting he was in to come to her side. But a part of her resisted. She wanted to believe she could resolve this without turning to her husband. After all, this shouldn't be happening to anyone, regardless of who they were or who they were married to. As she pondered, another nurse walked past her, quickly averting her eyes upon seeing Laura's pale and tense face. Laura reached out, trying to get her attention. "Please, I need to speak to someone. The doctor sent me back without examining me properly." The nurse hesitated, casting a furtive glance around as if she feared being reprimanded, then backed away, muttering something about being busy. Laura watched as the nurse disappeared down the hallway, feeling a deep tightness in her chest. The sense of helplessness was suffocating. As time passed, Laura began to feel a slight numbness. The pain, which had previously been just an uncomfortable twinge, was now beginning to spread with growing intensity. She felt a wave of heat and noticed that her breathing was heavier. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tried to hold on to the chair. Desperate, she tried once more to stand up to seek help, but the effort seemed to drain all her remaining energy. She stumbled slightly as she walked, drawing the attention of a few people around her, but no one moved to help her. Finally, she reached the reception desk, gripping the counter with all her strength. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. I really need help now. I can't wait any longer." The receptionist looked at her, clearly uncomfortable with Laura's insistence, and before she could respond, a doctor passing by heard the plea. He glanced at her quickly, visibly irritated. "Ma'am, if you keep insisting, we will ask you to leave the hospital and return when you can wait the necessary time. There are rules here that everyone must follow," he said, with chilling coldness. Laura was in shock. She felt her face burn with humiliation as the doctor's words echoed in her mind. How could they treat a pregnant woman with such indifference? What if something was actually wrong with her baby? The physical pain was already overwhelming, but the emotional pain felt even greater. Feeling completely desperate and unable to handle the situation alone, Laura finally picked up her phone and, with trembling hands, dialed Rafael's number. Her hand gripped the phone tightly as she waited for him to answer. "Laura, are you all right?" Rafael answered quickly, his concern evident in his voice. Laura's voice came out between sobs. "Rafael, I'm at the hospital, but they're not treating me. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm in a lot of pain, and no one seems to care." There was a brief but heavy silence on the other end of the line. Rafael took a deep breath, and Laura knew he was trying to keep his composure. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything, just wait for me," he said, with a firm and determined tone. Hanging up, Laura felt a wave of relief mixed with shame. She knew Rafael would do everything in his power to help her, but she hated that the situation had come to this point. All she wanted was dignified care, something everyone deserved, but in this hospital, it felt like her pain was irrelevant. She returned to her seat in the waiting room, breathing deeply and trying to stay calm. Every second felt like an eternity as she awaited Rafael's arrival. She knew that for him, there would be no excuses that could justify what was happening, and a slight feeling of justice began to form in her heart. Around her, the hospital continued its flow of indifference and disregard, but something had changed in Laura. Rafael's presence might represent the beginning of a change that she wished for not only for herself, but for everyone treated with such inhumanity. Laura felt time dragging as she awaited Rafael's arrival. Each movement was a struggle against the pain, but what weighed most was the emotional exhaustion. She leaned back in the chair, observing the hospital around her, as if she were seeing every detail with a painful clarity for the first time. In front of her, a young mother tried to console a boy who was crying, clearly disturbed by some kind of pain. The mother, with a tired and exasperated expression, waved at a nurse passing by who didn't even glance her way. Laura noticed the deep circles under the woman's eyes and felt an invisible bond of empathy form. Both were being ignored in their needs, reduced to mere anonymous presences. Beside her, an elderly man was struggling in vain to adjust his oxygen mask. He looked around, searching for help, but the averted gazes of the staff were the only response he received. Laura tried to offer an encouraging smile to the man, but the pain in her own body made even that simple gesture difficult. Gradually, a silent anger began to grow within Laura. It wasn't just for herself, but for all those who were treated as if they didn't matter. The hospital, which should have been a place of healing and care, seemed more like an institution where those with power or social status were attended to swiftly, while everyone else was left to suffer in silence. She knew Rafael's arrival would change the dynamic. This always happened when he was around. The influence of his name and position was something she respected, yet at the same time, despised. How was it possible that something as essential as medical care depended on status? It infuriated her deeply, leaving her torn between the relief of knowing he would help and the frustration of needing such intervention. As the clock continued to mark the endless minutes, Laura overheard a nearby conversation between two nurses. They spoke quietly, but loud enough for Laura to catch parts of their sentences. "Have you heard about the budget cuts?" All thanks to this management wanting to maintain a luxurious appearance while cutting the basics, one murmured, and the other nodded in agreement. "Yes, and it's the patients and us who suffer, trying to keep up with less and less resources," added the second nurse, exhaustion evident in her voice. Laura felt a chill run down her spine at hearing that. It wasn't just negligence, but a systemic failure that seemed to extend throughout the hospital. She knew Rafael always tried to maintain the hospital as a high-quality environment, but now she realized he might not be aware of how the changes and cuts were directly affecting patient care. At that moment, the pain returned with a force that made her flinch slightly. Her heartbeat quickened, and she closed her eyes, trying to focus on controlling her breathing. She felt vulnerable and exposed, as if her dignity was being gradually stripped away. When she opened her eyes, she saw Rafael approaching through the hospital's main entrance. He walked with firm steps, his expression a mix of concern and determination. Seeing him, Laura felt an immediate wave of relief, but also a pang of shame. It wasn't fair that he had to leave his work to ensure she received proper care. Rafael quickly sensed the tension in the environment, and upon reaching Laura's side, he held her hand firmly. "I'm here now. I'll take care of this," he said with his characteristic certainty. One of the nurses noticed Rafael's presence and instantly adjusted his posture, almost as if he had been caught off guard. Rafael looked at the nurse, his tone sharp. "My wife has been here for hours and hasn't received adequate care. I want to speak with the person in charge of this wing right now." The nurse hesitated for a moment, the surprise clear on his face, before hurrying off to fetch the supervisor. Laura watched the scene in silence, the anger and relief still pulsing within her. It shouldn't be this way. She shouldn't need her husband's intervention to be treated with dignity. But at the same time, Rafael's determination was a reminder that she wasn't alone. Minutes later, a man in a suit arrived, evidently informed about Rafael's presence. He introduced himself as the administrative manager of the wing, and upon seeing Rafael's severe expression, straightened his posture. "Mr. Rafael, I deeply apologize for the situation. We'll ensure your wife receives immediate care," said the man, clearly uncomfortable. Rafael looked at him, his voice low but filled with authority. "This isn't just about my wife. It's about everyone here waiting and suffering without necessary care. I want an explanation of how this hospital, which should serve everyone, allows this kind of negligent treatment." The manager paled slightly and shifted nervously. "We're dealing with staffing and budget adjustments, sir. Unfortunately, it's been a challenge to maintain the same level of care." Laura noticed the discomfort on the manager's face, and the idea that the issue was bigger than just one case of poor treatment struck her deeply. Rafael continued questioning the manager, while Laura observed the environment, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. She knew her husband would do whatever was necessary to guarantee fair and dignified treatment, but the bigger question still lingered. She wondered how many people would have to suffer and how many changes would be needed to correct this system of disregard and inequality. Laura struggled to stay calm, but the pain was becoming unbearable. Rafael's presence by her side brought temporary comfort, yet she knew time was running out. He held her hand firmly, and although he tried not to show it, she could see the fear in his eyes, a rare sight in a man usually so assured. Rafael turned to the manager, his voice now firm and determined. "I want my wife seen right now, and I want a detailed explanation of what's happening in this hospital," he said, his voice loaded with authority. The manager gestured to a nearby nurse, and within minutes, Laura was taken to an examination room. Rafael followed her, but upon reaching the door, the same doctor who had dismissed Laura earlier approached, looking surprised to see them. "Ma'am, we already asked you to wait in the reception area. There's no need for all this urgency. Pregnancy comes with discomforts," the doctor said, showing no empathy. Rafael stared at the doctor in disbelief. "My wife has been in intense pain for hours, and your only response is that pregnancy comes with discomforts?" He crossed his arms, expecting an explanation. The doctor hesitated for a moment, noticing Rafael's authoritative stance. "Well, we are dealing with high demand, and perhaps I can check her vital signs now." Laura felt a knot form in her stomach as she heard the lack of commitment in the doctor's voice. The pain was becoming increasingly difficult to bear, and the relief of having Rafael nearby was starting to mix with anger and frustration at needing him to be heard. As the doctor performed the examination mechanically, Laura stared at the ceiling, trying to hold back her tears. Rafael never took his eyes off the doctor, as if scrutinizing her every move. When the exam was over, the doctor turned to them, avoiding Rafael's gaze. "Her vital signs are normal," she said, but her expression was unconvincing. "I recommend she remains under observation, but I don't see an immediate need for intervention." Rafael took a step forward, now visibly irritated. "What I need to do to make you take her seriously? She's been here for hours, waiting for help, and you treat her with disdain. Who is in charge of this wing?" Before the doctor could respond, the manager re-entered the room, visibly uncomfortable with Rafael's tone. "Sir, we are doing everything we can to attend to your wife," he said defensively. "We have a limited team and need to prioritize the most severe cases." Rafael gave a bitter smile, shaking his head. "I'd expect this from a hospital barely surviving, but not from this hospital, which has the resources and infrastructure necessary to treat everyone with dignity." The manager averted his gaze, as if he had no clear answer. Laura felt a weight in her chest as she realized that Rafael's struggle was against more than just negligent staff. It was against an entire system that seemed to prioritize administrative interests over human life. At that moment, a new wave of pain coursed through Laura, and she involuntarily curled up, gripping the edge of the bed tightly. Rafael immediately knelt beside her, holding her hand, his gaze filled with concern. The doctor looked at Laura, hesitating, and finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. Perhaps we should conduct a more detailed examination," she said, as if making a concession. She quickly gave some instructions to a nurse to prepare the necessary equipment. While they waited for the exam, Laura noticed that Rafael was in a state of tension he rarely exhibited. He was trying to maintain control, but the frustration and anger were visible. "Laura, I'm so sorry you're going through this. This isn't right," he murmured, his voice laden with guilt. She squeezed his hand, trying to offer some comfort. "It's not your fault, Rafael. This hospital should treat everyone like this, without needing your involvement." The doctor returned, and the room fell silent as she conducted the exam. Laura's body throbbed with pain and anxiety, and each second felt like an eternity. Finally, the doctor finished the procedure and addressed Rafael. "She's showing signs of premature contractions, which could pose a risk to the baby," she said, her voice now with a more professional tone but still lacking empathy. "We'll prepare her for more intensive monitoring." Rafael nodded, but it was evident he was at his limit. Laura's condition now required urgent care, and he couldn't accept that she had spent hours without proper attention. The pain she had endured wasn't just physical. It was the weight of dehumanization affecting her deeply. Laura was moved to a more appropriate room, but the hospital's bleak atmosphere and the staff's ongoing resistance continued to loom over them like a shadow. Rafael stayed close, ensuring no one ignored or neglected her condition, but a sense of helplessness began to surface. He approached the bed and looked directly into Laura's eyes, and she saw the unyielding determination he always carried in difficult situations. "This isn't going to end like this, Laura. I'm going to see this through to the end," he said, his voice firm, promising justice for her and for everyone suffering in that hospital. Laura smiled faintly, her body still tense with pain, yet feeling that, for the first time, someone was listening. Rafael's fight went beyond what was visible. He was determined to change a system that had failed her and so many others. And even amid all the suffering, Laura began to realize that something greater was being set in motion. As Laura was being prepped for intensive monitoring, the administrative manager, Marcelo, retreated to the administration office, trying to process what had just happened. He knew that Rafael, the hospital owner, had every right to be furious, but Marcelo also bore the pressure of keeping the hospital running on an increasingly tight budget. Rafael's arrival had put him in a delicate position. He had to choose between protecting his team and preserving the institution's reputation. Deep down, Marcelo knew something was wrong. Since the latest budget cuts, patient complaints had risen and staff morale was declining. He recalled the CEO's words in a recent meeting. "We need to make adjustments to stay competitive. Cuts are inevitable." It was easy for them, Marcelo thought, oblivious to the daily impact on patients and employees. Sitting in his chair, Marcelo pondered the fine line he had to walk. He felt that each administrative decision was a choice between two evils. There were disgruntled employees, neglected patients, and now, the owner's wife facing some of the worst care he could imagine. Across the corridor, Dr. Roberta, the doctor on call, felt a growing irritation. She was overworked, and the hospital had cut the number of professionals in her wing. It had been difficult to keep up with demand before, but now it seemed impossible. Over recent months, her shifts were filled with directives prioritizing private and celebrity patients, leaving others waiting. "I can't be everywhere at once," Dr. Roberta thought as she washed her hands, preparing for another procedure. "It's not my fault that the owner's wife is facing difficulties. I'm just following orders to prioritize the most urgent cases and those that, well, bring more visibility to the hospital." She felt a slight pang of regret as she remembered the harsh way she had spoken to Laura. Something within her seemed to question her attitude now, but she quickly squashed the feeling, rationalizing that her cold approach was an automatic response after months of pressure. Her lack of empathy had become a personal defense, a way to stay focused and avoid emotional burnout. On the other hand, Marcelo knew his administrative stance served as a line of defense to protect the staff. He knew each employee's limitations and challenges, but at the same time, he had to defend the hospital's financial interests. He justified the decisions, believing that, in the long run, they could stabilize the institution and ensure ongoing care. However, the current reality showed that the situation was unsustainable. Hearing the door open, Marcelo looked up and saw Dr. Roberta entering, her face showing concern. "We need to talk about what happened with Rafael's wife," she said bluntly. Marcelo nodded, knowing this conversation was inevitable. "I understand that you're overwhelmed, Roberta, but Rafael demands explanations, and honestly, he has a right to." "The negligence with Laura was unacceptable," the doctor sighed, pressing her fingers against her temple. "I know that, but we're understaffed, and with the cuts, it's worse. I can't magically treat everyone and still provide personalized attention. I'm exhausted," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "And let's be honest, Marcelo, it wasn't you who decided we should prioritize high-profile patients." Marcelo looked away, with no counterargument to that accusation. It was a reality that the hospital kept a close eye on rankings and status, which often meant resources were directed where they would bring more publicity return. But now, seeing the impact on Laura and the chaos the incident was generating, he began to question this policy. "Of course, I set that priority," he admitted, his voice lower. "But it was never to ignore a pregnant woman in a critical situation, Roberta." Dr. Roberta shook her head, a resigned gesture. "We're constantly pressured to improve care, but no one considers the impact of these cuts. You know I would never treat a patient this way, but the system is driving us to make these unimaginable choices. I've lost control of how to handle these situations." A heavy silence fell between them. Marcelo knew the doctor was right in some respects. Although his stance might seem negligent, he understood that the failures went beyond individual attitudes. It was an entire system in need of reform. Marcelo and Dr. Roberta both knew that Rafael's presence demanded quick action, but the problem was bigger than one case. They both sensed that the situation revealed a chain reaction crisis, one that could ruin public trust in the hospital if nothing was done to change it. "We need to give Rafael a convincing response," Marcelo finally said, sighing. "But it's not enough to just pacify one situation. We're going to have to review our procedures, Roberta. This practice of prioritizing certain profiles has to end if we want to keep the hospital running with dignity." Dr. Roberta nodded slowly, though her expression remained filled with doubt. "I agree, but are we prepared to face the consequences of a change like this? What if the investors decide the hospital isn't profitable enough?" Marcelo shook his head, recognizing the magnitude of the dilemma. He wanted to believe it was possible to find a balance between profit and dignity, but he also knew the hospital relied on administrative decisions from investors who prioritized financial outcomes over patient care. "Maybe it's time we show Rafael what's really happening with the hospital. He has the power to intervene where we can't," he said, his voice heavy. Marcelo realized that this might be the only opportunity to bring about change, though he knew the cost could be high. The doctor looked at him, her gaze loaded with skepticism, but also with a mutual understanding. She knew that as long as the hospital followed this profit-driven logic, more cases like Laura's would occur. And deep down, she was beginning to question whether this was an environment where she could continue working without compromising her own values. Laura felt more at ease knowing Rafael was by her side and that the hospital, under his pressure, finally seemed willing to take her situation seriously. The staff prepared an observation room for closer monitoring, and an additional doctor was called in to review her tests. Though she was still in pain, Laura felt that perhaps, at last, her case would be treated with the urgency it deserved. Rafael remained at her side, holding her hand and offering words of comfort as they waited for the new doctor, who was supposed to conduct more detailed exams. The atmosphere around them seemed less hostile, and Rafael's presence commanded a sense of respect. Even the manager, Marcelo, approached them, explaining that they would do everything possible to ensure Laura's well-being. The doctor arrived shortly after and, this time, seemed to approach her with empathy, asking about her symptoms and listening intently to each word. He adjusted the equipment, explaining that he would perform an ultrasound to check the baby's condition and understand the source of her pain. Laura closed her eyes, feeling a brief sense of relief that, finally, someone was taking action with seriousness. As the exam began, the room fell silent. The doctor moved the device over Laura's abdomen, and Rafael watched closely, his face a mix of worry and hope. Laura's eyes were fixed on the screen, searching for any sign that everything was okay. But as the exam continued, the doctor's expression shifted to one of uncertainty. He hesitated, squinting at the image on the screen, then cast a quick glance at the nurse beside him, who promptly handed him a clipboard. "What's going on?" Rafael asked, noticing the exchange of looks. The doctor took a deep breath before responding. "We're going to need a few more tests to be sure. It might just be a false alarm, but we want to rule out any possible risks." Laura felt a chill run through her. What had seemed like a routine exam was now becoming something uncertain. Rafael squeezed her hand, trying to reassure her, but she felt an increasing anxiety, realizing the problem might be more serious than she had anticipated. The doctor stepped back, instructing a nurse to prepare Laura for longer monitoring. At the same time, he requested a detailed analysis of her previous tests, mentioning that, to ensure both her and the baby's safety, they needed to rule out any signs of a severe complication. As Laura was transferred to a monitoring room, Rafael followed the doctor, determined to get answers. He had reached the end of his patience. "I want to know exactly what's happening with my wife," he demanded firmly. The doctor, though experienced, seemed to hesitate. "We're doing everything we can, sir." But with a high patient flow and reduced staff, some essential exams weren't done as thoroughly as they should have been. "We're working on it now." Rafael took a deep breath, trying to contain his anger. "Are you telling me my wife might be at risk due to a triage error? Because the staff ignored critical symptoms?" His voice was sharp, each word charged with indignation. The nurse beside the doctor shot him a warning look, and the doctor seemed to back down. The team did what they could with the resources available. We're doing our best to rectify this now and guarantee Laura receives priority monitoring, he said quietly. Rafael returned to Laura's side, trying to keep a calm expression so as not to alarm her. He knew the moment demanded caution, but the feeling of helplessness was devastating. Laura looked at him, and they exchanged a look of mutual understanding. She, too, was aware of what could be at stake. Finally, the doctor returned, informing them that the initial exam indicated premature contractions. We'll need to administer medication to control the contractions and keep you under continuous observation, he said, trying to sound optimistic. Laura and Rafael nodded, a bit relieved, believing that at least there was a plan in sight. But before the medication could be administered, an alarm sounded on the floor. The nurse who was preparing to start the procedure received an urgent call over the radio and, within seconds, left the room with a hurried apology. Laura and Rafael looked at each other in confusion. "This is a procedure that can't wait," Rafael murmured, his voice heavy with frustration. 10 minutes passed, and no one returned. Laura began to feel the pain intensify again, and the air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Rafael finally left the room to seek help, but the hallway was chaotic. There was an emergency in another wing, and all the staff appeared to have been redirected to handle the situation. Rafael returned to Laura's side, his face filled with indignation. "They promised you would have priority," he said, his voice wavering between desperation and fury. Laura held his hand tightly, trying to keep him calm. "I know you're doing everything you can, Rafael," she murmured, trying to hide the fear that was starting to consume her. The sense of hope they had felt just minutes earlier evaporated, leaving a void of uncertainty and despair. Laura was visibly weaker, and Rafael felt utterly powerless, as if he were watching a tragedy unfold without being able to do anything about it. The silence in the observation room was almost deafening, and Laura felt adrift, as if she were in a place between physical pain and emotional exhaustion. Rafael was by her side, trying to keep his composure, but it was clear that the situation was slipping out of his control. He held her hand tightly, his gaze fixed on the door, as if expecting someone to walk in any moment with the promised treatment. But as the minutes passed, it became clear they were, once again, forgotten. Laura looked at Rafael, studying his face intently. He was a strong, determined man who had always seemed invincible to her. But here, at her side, she could see a vulnerability that rarely showed. She felt a mix of love and sadness as she realized that, despite all his influence, Rafael was powerless against the system he himself had helped build. "Rafael," Laura murmured, calling his attention. He turned to her, and she squeezed his hand tighter. "I know you're doing your best, but this shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't depend on you being here for me to get the care I need," he sighed, lowering his head, visibly affected by her words. "I know, Laura, and I'm so sorry you're going through this. I should ensure that no one, especially you, would ever be treated this way." She paused, searching for the right words to express what she felt. "But, Rafael, you can't be everywhere at once. The problem isn't whether you're here or not. It's that this hospital has become a place where people have to beg for dignity." Rafael looked away, clearly absorbing what she was saying. The truth of Laura's words hit him hard. Over the years, he had focused on expanding the hospital, on creating a high-standard environment, but without realizing it, he seemed to have lost sight of what truly mattered: human care. "And maybe I contributed to this," he admitted, his voice wavering. "I've always aimed to make the hospital a model of excellence, but I distanced myself from the day-to-day reality, from what people here actually go through." Laura watched him, feeling a mix of compassion and sadness. She knew Rafael better than anyone and understood that he carried a deep sense of responsibility, even though he rarely admitted to faults. But now, faced with the situation they were in, he was beginning to confront his own limitations and the consequences of his choices. "Maybe you can change that, Rafael," she said, a note of hope in her voice. "But first, we need to get through this." As they continued waiting, Rafael began reflecting on the decisions he had made over the years. He remembered the meetings, the budget cuts, the discussions with investors. At some point, the pressure to keep the hospital profitable led him to prioritize financial aspects, and he ended up overlooking the impact of those choices on the patients. "I promise you, Laura," he said, his voice firm, "this won't go unnoticed. I'll do whatever it takes to change the reality of this hospital." She nodded, holding his hand affectionately. Despite the suffering she was enduring, that moment of shared vulnerability brought them closer in a way few situations could. Suddenly, the silence was interrupted by the arrival of a nurse, who appeared hurried and visibly nervous. "Mr. and Mrs., I'm so sorry for the delay. The doctor is on his way, and we'll start the procedure now," she said, trying to sound reassuring. Laura and Rafael nodded, though frustration was still evident in their expressions. The nurse adjusted the equipment around Laura and gave a few instructions, attempting to make up for lost time with hurried efficiency. During the procedure, Rafael noticed that the nurse kept exchanging glances with him, as if recognizing his position. Finally, she succumbed to curiosity and spoke quietly, as if sharing a secret. "Mr. Rafael, I hope you know that not everyone here supports the recent administrative decisions. Many of us are overworked, and sometimes we don't have a choice." He looked at the nurse sharply, surprised by her frankness. "I understand, and thank you for sharing that," he replied sincerely. He felt divided. Part of his anger now directed at himself, while another part grew against the system he managed. The nurse continued adjusting the equipment, and as she worked, Laura watched Rafael silently. In her mind, a series of conflicting thoughts and emotions played out. She was grateful he was there, but at the same time, she questioned how the hospital he ran could have strayed so far from caring for people. After the procedure, the doctor entered the room and began reviewing the data, explaining that the monitoring indicated a slight improvement, but that Laura would still need to remain under observation. He explained that the situation was under control, but that any changes would be reported immediately. The news brought some relief to Rafael and Laura, but they both knew the problem went beyond this particular moment. As the doctor continued giving instructions, Rafael was determined to make profound changes. He knew he would have to face investor resistance and confront the administrative structure that allowed so many failures, but Laura's suffering had ignited a new determination within him. After the doctor's explanation, Laura looked at Rafael, feeling strengthened by his presence, but also aware of the challenge they would both face. "We'll get through this," she said with a slight smile, trying to ease the tension. Rafael smiled back, feeling more determined than ever. "Yes, and when we leave here, we're going to make this place a true example of care." Laura felt exhausted, but she was determined to stay calm. Her body felt lighter, still under the effects of the administered pain relievers, but an uncontrollable anxiety hung in the air. Rafael, by her side, maintained a constant state of vigilance. He kept checking the time, and each time the door opened, his eyes fixed on it, hoping to see someone come in with updates on her condition. The silence was broken by a slight movement at the door, and a nurse entered, pushing a cart with instruments. "Mrs. Laura, I need to check your blood pressure again," she said softly, adjusting the monitor around Laura's arm. Laura watched every movement of the nurse, who seemed nervous, her hands trembling. She exchanged a quick glance with Rafael, trying to understand the reason behind the tension. "Is everything all right, nurse?" Laura asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The nurse hesitated for a moment, but quickly responded with a forced smile. "Yes, ma'am. Just a busy day. We have a lot of patients in the emergency ward." Rafael tightened his grip on Laura's hand, his jaw clenched. He knew there was more to the nurse's answer. "I understand it's busy, but my wife has been here for hours, and we still haven't received a definitive assessment. I want to know what's really going on," he said, his eyes not leaving the nurse. The nurse looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll call the responsible doctor as soon as possible, sir," she replied, her voice slightly shaky as she finished adjusting the monitor. She quickly left the room, and Rafael took a deep breath, trying to contain his frustration. Laura noticed the tension in his face and squeezed his hand, trying to reassure him. "Rafael, I know you're doing everything you can," she murmured softly. "And I'm okay for now." He turned to her, his eyes full of worry and guilt. "Laura, this is all my fault. I should have been more attentive to what's happening here. I never imagined the hospital would reach this point. Laura shook her head, trying to calm him. It's not your fault. I know you did everything with the best intentions, but maybe now is the time to see things from a new perspective, to find ways to truly help those in need. Rafael sighed, feeling the weight of her words. You're right, and I promise we'll change this. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, with a renewed sense of determination. But before they could continue their conversation, the door opened again, and the doctor entered the room with a serious expression. He approached Laura's bed, holding her chart, and cast a brief glance at Rafael before focusing on Laura. Mrs. Laura, I reviewed the tests and it seems the situation might be a bit more complicated than we initially thought, the doctor said, his voice low and cautious. Laura felt her stomach clench, and Rafael leaned forward, fixing his gaze on the doctor. What do you mean by more complicated? He asked, his voice tense. The doctor adjusted his glasses and consulted the chart before responding. The tests indicate a possible complication with the placenta. It may be partially detaching, which would explain the pain and contractions. We need a few more tests to confirm, but this could put the baby at risk. Laura swallowed hard, feeling fear spread through her body. Rafael squeezed her hand, his face tense and pale. So, what are we going to do? What are the next steps? He tried to remain calm, but his voice was shaky. We'll need an emergency ultrasound to assess the placenta's condition. Excuse me, I need to speak with the team to prepare the room immediately, the doctor replied before hurrying out. Laura and Rafael exchanged a look of anguish. Rafael? I'm scared, Laura whispered, her eyes filling with tears. What if something happens to the baby? He moved closer, gently touching her face. Let's not think of the worst, Laura. I'm here, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you and our baby are safe, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Time seemed to drag as they waited for the doctor's return. Laura tried to distract herself, but every second felt like an eternity, and her anxiety grew. Finally, after what felt like hours, the door opened and a nurse entered, informing them that the ultrasound room was ready. Rafael accompanied Laura to the room, helping her get comfortable. The doctor adjusted the equipment and began the examination, carefully moving the transducer over her belly. The monitor displayed grayscale images, but Laura struggled to understand what she was seeing. The silence was oppressive as the doctor studied the screen, frowning. Rafael held Laura's hand, trying to remain calm, but the tension in the air was palpable. Finally, the doctor paused and turned to them. Well, the exam confirms there's a slight placental detachment. We'll need to keep her under constant observation and administer medication to prevent further contractions, he said, trying to sound reassuring. But with proper monitoring, I believe we can avoid a premature birth. Laura felt a mix of relief and worry. The problem was serious, but at least there was a chance to control the situation. Rafael took a deep breath, nodding. Thank you, doctor. We'll do whatever is necessary. The doctor stood up, preparing to leave the room. We'll transfer her to the maternal intensive care unit. The team will monitor her 24/7. But please, notify me immediately if there's any sign of pain or discomfort. As the doctor left, Rafael turned to Laura, gently caressing her face. We're in this together, Laura. You're the strongest person I know, and I know we'll get through this. She managed a faint smile, trying to stay optimistic. Thank you, Rafael. I know that with you by my side, I can face anything. However, shortly after Laura was moved to the new unit, an alarm went off in the room. A medical team quickly entered, their faces revealing the urgency of the situation. Mrs. Laura, we're detecting a sharp drop in your blood pressure. We need to act now. Rafael stood frozen, his heart racing, unable to do anything but watch as the team worked frantically around her. He tried to stay calm, but he felt the anxiety growing within him, like an inescapable shadow. One of the nurses approached him with a serious look. Sir, we need you to wait outside while we stabilize her blood pressure. I promise we'll do everything possible to care for her and the baby. Rafael hesitated, but knew he had no choice. He stepped back, watching the door close as the team of doctors and nurses hurried to stabilize Laura. Every second felt like an eternity as he waited in the hallway, his heart heavy and his mind filled with a sense of helplessness. Inside, Laura could hear the hurried footsteps of the doctors, the sounds of the machines monitoring her vitals, and the anxious murmur of voices around her. She tried to focus, to breathe deeply, but the fear was overwhelming. Everything seemed to move in slow motion, and one image lingered in her mind. The baby she so hoped to hold in her arms. Rafael stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door of the room where Laura was being treated. The sound of monitors and the hurried footsteps of the medical team echoed, amplifying the tension in the air. He ran his hand over his face repeatedly, trying to contain his anguish. Rafael had always prided himself on being someone who found quick solutions to problems. But in this situation, all he could do was wait and trust the medical team. "Mr. Rafael," a nurse called out, stepping out of the room with an expression of exhaustion and concern. "We've managed to stabilize Laura's blood pressure, but she still requires constant monitoring. We'll keep her under intensive observation." Rafael exhaled deeply, trying to digest the information. "Can I see her?" he asked, his voice strained. The nurse nodded. "Yes, but please try to keep it brief. She needs to stay calm and rest." Rafael entered the room, and his heart clenched upon seeing Laura lying there, connected to various monitors, her face pale but her eyes still shining. She offered him a faint smile, trying to appear strong. "Rafael?" she murmured, reaching out her hand. He approached, took her hand, feeling its warmth, and leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I'm here, Laura. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She smiled, but he noticed the tears in her eyes, a reflection of the pain and insecurity she was enduring. "Rafael, I know this is scary, but I need you to stay calm." Rafael pressed his lips together, trying to hold back his own emotions. "I'm sorry, Laura. I should be calmer for you. But seeing you like this, going through all of this, it makes me question everything. This hospital, the system. How did we let things get to this point?" She looked at him tenderly, recognizing the internal conflict he was grappling with. "Rafael, you've always wanted the best for this place, and I know that. But maybe it's time to change. Maybe all of this is happening so you can see reality." Rafael looked away, feeling the weight of guilt and responsibility. He knew Laura was right, but admitting it left him vulnerable, something he rarely allowed himself to feel. "I thought I was helping, making this hospital a place of excellence, but in the end, it seems I lost focus on what truly matters." Laura squeezed his hand in a comforting gesture. "You can still make a difference, Rafael. Not just for me, but for all the people who go through this every day." He nodded, taking a deep breath and feeling the strength in her words. Laura had always been his inspiration, someone who encouraged him to see beyond the superficial. "I promise you, as soon as we're out of here, things will change. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure no one else goes through what you're experiencing." She gave a slight smile, and he could see the glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I trust you. Just remember to take care of yourself too. I need you to be okay, Rafael. We need to be okay for our baby." Emotion overtook him, and for a moment, the weight of being the hospital owner and the burden of his past decisions faded, leaving only the love he felt for her and for the family they were building together. Suddenly, the door opened, and the doctor entered, looking somewhat nervous upon seeing Rafael. "Mr. Rafael, I need to discuss some technical details about the monitoring and the next steps in treatment." Rafael stood, still holding Laura's hand. "That's fine. We can talk here," he said firmly. The doctor glanced at Laura, as if hesitating to discuss the issue in her presence, but Rafael didn't budge. "My wife has the right to know what's going on. Speak openly." The doctor nodded, adjusting his clipboard before continuing. "Of course, we're stabilizing the placental detachment and controlling the contractions, but we need to take precautions to prevent further complications. There is a risk that we might need to deliver the baby sooner." Laura and Rafael exchanged a look of concern. She squeezed his hand, trying to process the information. "But will the baby be okay if born now?" she asked, her voice low and trembling. The doctor paused before answering. "The situation isn't ideal, but we have the resources to care for the baby in the event of a premature birth. However, our goal is to prolong the pregnancy as much as possible." Rafael nodded, trying to stay calm. "Do whatever it takes, doctor. Just assure me that my wife and child will be safe." The doctor offered a slight smile, attempting to reassure them. "We're doing everything we can, Mr. Rafael. Our team is committed to providing the best care." After the doctor left, Rafael sat by Laura's side again, his expression serious. "We'll get through this together, Laura. I won't let anything happen to you or our baby." Laura looked at him, and he could see her trust in his words. Even in the face of fear and uncertainty, she continued to radiate strength and love. "I know we'll overcome this, Rafael. You've always been my support, and I trust you more than anything." Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of a nurse, who entered with a gentle smile, carrying a soft blanket. "Here you go, Mrs. Laura. I thought this might help make you more comfortable." Laura smiled gratefully as the nurse adjusted the blanket around her. "Thank you," she murmured, feeling the warmth spread over her body. It was a small gesture, but at that moment, it made all the difference. As the nurse finished adjusting the blanket, she looked at Rafael with an understanding expression. "Mr. Rafael, I know this is a difficult situation, but I want you to know that many of us here genuinely care. We're doing our best to take care of Mrs. Laura." He nodded, grateful, though a shadow of frustration still lingered on his face. "Thank you for everything you're doing, but it's hard to accept that the system allows situations like this to happen, that people need to beg for dignity." The nurse gave him a sympathetic look and lowered her voice. "I understand, and many of us share that feeling. Perhaps this experience will bring about changes. Sometimes, it's situations like these that awaken the need to do better." Rafael reflected on her words, and something within him seemed to stir. It was a call to responsibility, a reminder of why he had founded the hospital. Not just to offer cutting-edge treatments, but to ensure that every person received the humane and dignified care they deserved. When the nurse left, Rafael turned his attention back to Laura, touching her hand. "From now on, everything will change. I promise myself that. For you, for our baby, and for all the people who walk through these doors." Laura smiled, her eyes full of love and gratitude. "I know you'll do the right thing, and I'll be by your side always." Rafael left Laura's room determined, his face marked with tension and a clear resolve in every step. He had made a promise to Laura, and now more than ever, he was determined to keep it. He walked quickly through the hospital's corridors, passing by patients and staff who barely noticed his presence until he reached the administrative floor. Pushing open the door to Marcelo's office, he saw the manager on the phone, speaking in a formal tone to someone. Marcelo ended the call upon seeing Rafael, lowering the phone with a look of surprise. "Mr. Rafael? I didn't expect to see you here right now," Marcelo said, adjusting the collar of his shirt, visibly nervous. Rafael closed the door behind him and crossed his arms, looking directly at Marcelo. "We need to talk. Now." Marcelo swallowed hard, nodding. "Of course, Mr. Rafael. How can I help?" Rafael stepped closer, his voice low and laced with frustration. "I know very well what's happening in this hospital. My wife is being neglected while the hospital prioritizes budget cuts and favors high-profile patients. I didn't build this place for that." Marcelo hesitated before responding, trying to maintain his composure. "Mr. Rafael, I understand your concerns, but we have to contend with financial realities. Without these decisions, the hospital wouldn't be able to keep its doors open." "Keep the doors open?" Rafael interrupted, his voice rising. "What's the point of keeping the doors open if we're not providing the basic care that patients deserve? I've watched my wife suffer negligence in this hospital, ignored and mistreated. Do you have any idea how unacceptable that is?" Marcelo looked away, struggling to find an answer that might calm Rafael, though he knew it would be difficult. "I see your perspective, sir, but the cuts were necessary. The pressure to keep the hospital competitive and attractive for investors requires us to make adjustments." Rafael let out a bitter laugh, disbelief evident on his face. "So that's what this is about? Keeping the hospital attractive? At the expense of what? Leaving patients like Laura and so many others, at the mercy of a system that only cares about numbers. Marcelo sighed, lowering his voice as if he were sharing a confidential truth. Mr. Rafael, I know it sounds cold, but that's the reality. We have financial targets to meet, and without that, we can't keep the hospital operational. Our priorities have shifted. Rafael closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to control his anger. When he opened them, his expression was one of fierce determination. Not anymore. That ends today. I'm not going to allow this hospital to become just a profit machine. We are going back to our original commitment, Marcelo. We need to refocus on humane care, and I don't care how much it will cost. Marcelo looked at him, incredulous. Sir, with all due respect, this could mean losing investments, reducing our profit margin. The investors won't accept this kind of change. The investors will have to deal with it, Rafael countered, his tone unwavering. This is my hospital, and it was built with the purpose of helping people, not treating them as numbers. Marcelo remained silent, clearly conflicted. Rafael stepped closer, his voice lower but still filled with intensity. I'm going to review every budget cut that's been made. We're going to restructure this place so that patients, all of them, receive the care they deserve. And I'll personally inform the investors so they understand that this hospital has a greater purpose. Marcelo sighed, resigned. I understand your position, Mr. Rafael, but I must warn you, this decision may bring a series of consequences. We could lose contracts, and the hospital's image could suffer. Rafael crossed his arms, firm in his resolve. Marcelo, I've heard enough about images and contracts. The hospital's image shouldn't come above people's lives. If we lose some investors along the way, so be it. We'll work with those who truly value what we're doing here. Marcelo nodded slowly, realizing there was no room for argument. Very well, Mr. Rafael. We'll review the adjustments we've made and prepare a new budget proposal. Rafael kept his gaze fixed on him. I want the entire staff to be informed. Every employee needs to know we're changing our focus, that we're restoring the hospital's original mission. Marcelo lowered his head, accepting the order. Yes, sir. I'll arrange a staff meeting. Rafael turned to leave, but stopped before reaching the door, casting one last look at Marcelo. And, Marcelo, make sure Laura's case is treated with priority and dignity. This is our chance to start over, and I don't intend to waste it. Marcelo nodded, though the weight of the change Rafael proposed was evident in his expression. As Rafael left, the manager stood silently, aware that this decision could transform the hospital into something far different from what the investors had planned, but perhaps exactly what it should have been from the beginning. Rafael returned to Laura's room with determined steps, but as he crossed the threshold, he softened his expression, striving to convey calm. Laura looked at him, and, seeing the determined look on her husband's face, felt a slight relief mixed with curiosity. You seem different, she remarked, reaching out to him. What happened? Rafael took her hand and sat beside her, his gaze carrying a firmness he barely recognized in himself. I had a conversation with Marcelo, he said, choosing his words carefully. Things are going to change, Laura. I promised that this hospital would be a place where everyone receives dignified care, and I'm going to make good on that promise. From today on, we will no longer prioritize status or financial interests over people's well-being. Laura watched her husband in silence, absorbing his words and feeling the sincerity in each one. I'm proud of you, Rafael, she murmured, giving him a soft smile. You've always been a man of values, but seeing you make this decision reminds me of why I fell in love with you. He returned her smile, gripping her hand a little tighter. I just want you to know that none of this would have happened without you. Seeing what you went through, what everyone here faces, opened my eyes to what really matters. Laura nodded, feeling a blend of relief and pride, though a shadow of worry still lingered over her. I hope this all works out, Rafael, but I also know that changes like these won't be easy. Rafael sighed, aware of the truth in her words. Yes, I know. I know there will be resistance, that the investors will probably push back, but I'm prepared to face whatever it takes. This isn't just about the hospital. It's about who I want to be, who we are together. The silence that followed was broken by the soft sound of footsteps in the corridor, and moments later, a nurse entered with a gentle smile, bringing medication for Laura. "Mrs. Laura, I'm here to administer your medication. We'll continue to monitor you closely." Laura nodded, and the nurse moved closer to adjust the four and carefully administer the dose. As she worked, she glanced at Rafael, seeming to hesitate before speaking. "Mr. Rafael, I heard about your decision, about the changes. And thank you. Many of us want to see this place return to what it once was." Rafael offered her a slight smile. "It's good to know I have the team's support. We're going to make this happen together." The nurse finished the procedure and left, leaving Rafael and Laura in a silence thick with emotion. He held her hand, his thumb brushing gently over her fingers, trying to project calm, though deep down he was acutely aware of the fragility of the situation. Laura looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and apprehension. "Rafael, I know this decision is going to bring many challenges, but you need to take care of yourself. You can't carry it all alone." He nodded, but the firm look remained on his face. "I have you by my side, and that's what gives me the strength to keep going." As they talked, Laura felt a slight pang in her abdomen, and the familiar discomfort made her take a deep breath. Rafael noticed the change in her expression immediately. "Laura, are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. She gave a slight smile, trying to reassure him. "Yes, just a pang. Nothing I can't handle." But she knew, too, that the situation was delicate, and each new pain was a reminder that the baby was still at risk. The clock on the wall marked each minute like a heavy beat, reinforcing the urgency of the moment. Rafael glanced at it, feeling the growing pressure. He knew he couldn't change everything overnight, but the promise he had made to Laura was engraved in his mind, and he would not let it be forgotten. Suddenly, the doctor entered the room, breaking the silence. "Mr. Rafael, Mrs. Laura, I'd like to discuss the next step in the treatment." He adjusted his glasses, his expression cautious. "We are managing to control the situation, but I must be honest. Any complication could require an immediate premature delivery." Rafael nodded, tension evident on his face. "I understand. And what are the chances of that happening?" The doctor hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's hard to predict. We're monitoring Laura constantly, but we need to be prepared for a possible intervention." Laura squeezed Rafael's hand, trying to stay calm amid the uncertainty. "Doctor, I understand the situation. I just want my baby to be safe." The doctor nodded, projecting a professional calm. "That's our primary goal. We'll do everything to ensure both you and the baby are well." After the doctor left, Rafael sat beside Laura again, the weight of responsibility etched on his face. He didn't want to show his worry, but it was hard to hide the pressure he felt. Laura noticed and gently caressed his hand. "Rafael, you don't have to carry all of this alone. I'm here, and I know that, no matter what happens, you'll always do what's best." He sighed, feeling comforted by her words. "I promise you, Laura, this change is going to happen. This hospital will be a place of compassion and dignity." She smiled, despite the visible exhaustion on her face. "I'm sure of it, and our baby will be proud to have a father who fights for what's right." The atmosphere in the room was charged with tension, but also with a sense of renewal. Rafael felt stronger than ever, determined to transform the hospital and the life they were building. He knew the journey would be arduous, but with Laura by his side, he was ready to face any obstacle. The calm in Laura's room was abruptly shattered when an alarm began to blare, filling the air with a shrill, piercing sound. Rafael jumped to his feet instantly, his eyes fixed on the monitors flashing erratic numbers and graphs. Laura's breathing seemed heavier, and the color in her face paled with each passing second. Within moments, a team of nurses and doctors rushed into the room, moving swiftly to stabilize her. The doctor, looking serious, checked the monitors and pressed gently on her abdomen while asking quick questions to the team. Her blood pressure's dropping, one of the nurses said, adjusting the monitor beside Laura's bed. "We're losing stabilization." Rafael gripped Laura's hand, feeling his heart race. "Laura, I'm here," he murmured, his voice thick with desperation. Laura opened her eyes slowly, fighting against the weakness overtaking her body. "Rafael," she whispered, a look of love and fear in her expression. "Take care of our baby." Before he could respond, the doctor turned to Rafael, his gaze intense. "Mr. Rafael, we need to act fast. Her condition is critical. We need to perform an emergency delivery now to save both her and the baby." Rafael nodded, his voice shaking. "Do whatever you need to, doctor. Just make sure they're okay." The medical team began to prepare Laura for transfer to the operating room. Rafael watched every move, feeling utterly powerless. He wanted to be in control, to take charge of the situation, but all he could do was place his trust in the team and in the very system that had failed him so many times. Marcelo, the hospital's administrator, appeared in the hallway as Laura was being taken away. He hesitated for a moment upon seeing Rafael, but eventually approached him. "Mr. Rafael, we're mobilizing all resources to ensure everything goes smoothly," he said carefully. Rafael shot Marcelo a steely look, tension apparent in every word he spoke. "If everything goes well, Marcelo, it will be a miracle. And if it doesn't, well, you'll witness changes far more drastic than you can imagine." Marcelo opened his mouth to respond but faltered, realizing any words would be inadequate. Rafael turned, fixing his gaze on the operating room door as the doctors entered, closing it behind Laura. He pressed his hands against the glass, feeling a crushing anguish as he realized that now everything was beyond his control. Inside the room, the voices of the doctors and nurses were muffled through the door, but Rafael could still hear the murmuring, the sound of instruments being prepared, and the constant movement. He closed his eyes, a silent prayer escaping his lips. In his heart, he knew he was facing the greatest test of his life. If he lost Laura, nothing would matter. All the fights for dignity and justice within the hospital seemed insignificant in comparison to the fear of losing the woman he loved and the child they were about to bring into the world. The minutes dragged on slowly, each second an eternity. Rafael felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see the nurse who had previously cared for Laura. She offered him a faint, supportive smile. "We're doing our best, Mr. Rafael," she said softly. "Laura is a strong woman, and the baby. We're doing everything to make sure everything will be all right." Rafael nodded, his gaze filled with both gratitude and anguish. "I trust you," he replied in a low voice, "and thank you for everything you're doing." Inside the operating room, the doctor made a precise incision, the team around him operating with almost mechanical precision. Laura, though weak, remained conscious, struggling to focus on her breathing and the presence of the baby inside her. She felt a gentle pressure and the steady movements of the doctors around her, but her mind stayed fixed on the little one she anxiously waited to meet. "Laura," the doctor murmured, noticing her gaze. "We're almost there. Hang in there." She nodded slightly, her strength waning, but with a determination that surpassed her physical limits. In the back of her mind, she thought of Rafael and the promise he had made to transform the hospital, to make it a symbol of care and humanity. This thought gave her the strength to hold on. After what felt like an eternity, the cry of a baby broke the silence in the operating room. Laura let out a sigh of relief, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She had done it. The baby was here, alive and healthy. The team around her also seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, and a nurse brought the baby close to Laura, allowing her a brief moment to see her child. Outside, Rafael heard the baby's cry and felt a wave of relief and emotion wash over him. His eyes filled with tears as he leaned his head against the door, offering silent thanks. Moments later, the doctor emerged from the room, approaching Rafael with a weary smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Rafael. The baby is well, and Laura is also stable." Rafael felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders, gratitude and joy overflowing. He shook the doctor's hand firmly, his eyes brimming with emotion. Thank you, doctor. You saved my family." The doctor nodded, but his expression turned serious. "Mr. Rafael, it wasn't easy. This hospital needs adequate resources and a full team. There's only so much we can manage with all the cuts." Rafael fixed his gaze on the doctor, a newfound and unshakable determination in his eyes. "I understand, and I promise that's going to change." After a few moments, Rafael was led to the room where Laura was resting with their baby in her arms. When he saw them, his heart filled with a joy he could barely describe. He approached slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter that perfect moment. Laura looked at him with a gentle smile, her eyes shining with emotion. "Rafael, we did it." He sat beside her, wrapping his arm around her and the baby, a deep sense of peace settling in his heart. "Yes, we did. And I'm going to make sure this hospital becomes the place that you and our child deserve. A place where everyone receives the care they need." Rafael spent the entire night awake beside Laura and their baby, watching them sleep peacefully. The joy and relief he felt were immense, yet a constant worry lingered in his mind, transforming the hospital. After everything they had experienced, he knew there was no turning back. He had made a commitment to Laura, to himself, and to every patient who entered there seeking help. At dawn, Marcelo entered the room with a serious expression and a tense posture. Seeing Rafael, he hesitated but then approached. "Mr. Rafael, we need to discuss the changes you mentioned. We've received a message from the investors." Rafael looked at Laura and the baby before carefully standing up and nodding at Marcelo. "Yes, let's talk," he said firmly. He followed Marcelo into a meeting room where other members of the administration were waiting. Some faces showed concern, others, skepticism. Rafael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. Marcelo began, breaking the silence. "Mr. Rafael, after your statement yesterday, the investors are demanding clarification. They're worried that the changes you're proposing could compromise the hospital's profitability. Some have even mentioned the possibility of withdrawing funding." Rafael nodded, absorbing Marcelo's words. "I understand their concerns, but let me be clear. This hospital was founded to help people. If we lose the support of some investors because of that, so be it. I'll find other ways to ensure the hospital runs." One of the administrators, a man with graying hair and a skeptical gaze, stood up, crossing his arms. "With all due respect, Mr. Rafael, you're putting the hospital's financial survival at risk. Without the funds we have now, we won't be able to sustain the infrastructure and high-quality equipment." Rafael took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. "What I'm proposing is a hospital that values human dignity, that treats every patient with respect, and that doesn't rely solely on profit. Yes, this may mean making financial adjustments, but I'm willing to take on that responsibility. We can seek new partnerships, perhaps with institutions that share our vision." Marcelo exchanged a worried look with the others. "But, Mr. Rafael, these changes could take time, and there's no guarantee that new partners will be willing to invest on the same terms. I'm not asking everyone to agree immediately," Rafael continued, his tone resolute. "But what happened to my wife has shown me and everyone here that this system is broken. Prioritizing high-profile patients and cutting basic resources is unacceptable." The tension in the room was palpable, and each administrator seemed to be weighing their own opinions. Finally, Marcelo sighed, giving in to Rafael's firm stance. "Mr. Rafael, if this is truly your decision, we'll need to create a transition plan. We can't change everything overnight, but we can start gradually." Rafael nodded, grateful for Marcelo's understanding. "Thank you, Marcelo. I know it will be a challenge, but I'm confident this is the right decision. Let's show the investors that this hospital can be a beacon of compassionate care." After the meeting, Rafael returned to Laura's room, where she awaited him with a gentle smile. Seeing him, she noticed the determined look on his face and knew he had kept his word. "How did it go?" she asked, holding his hand as he sat down beside her. Rafael sighed, feeling the weight of the conversation he'd just had. It was a bit tense, but they understood. Not everyone agreed right away, but we're going to start making changes. I want our hospital to be an example of care and humanity. Laura squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride. "Rafael, I know it'll be hard, but it's the right thing. You've always been someone who believes in the value of people, and this change will show everyone the true purpose of this place." He smiled, feeling a new lightness within him. "All of this is because of you, Laura, for you and for our son." I want you both to know that I fought to make this place worthy." As they talked, a nurse entered to check on the baby. Laura and Rafael watched her, and he felt a renewed gratitude for every professional who, despite the challenges, continued caring for patients with compassion. Before leaving, the nurse smiled at Rafael. "Mr. Rafael, I'm glad to hear about the changes you're proposing. Many of us needed to hear this." Rafael nodded, feeling that he was finally on the right path. "Thank you. And I promise these changes won't be just words. You'll see." News of the restructuring spread quickly throughout the hospital, and Rafael began receiving feedback from all areas. While many employees supported the idea of a more humane approach, the administrative and financial challenges were real, and he knew he would need all his skills to keep the hospital sustainable. In the following days, Rafael devoted himself to meetings, reaching out to potential new partners, and negotiating with the investors who remained hesitant. The pressure was enormous, but Laura's presence and her support were the fuel that kept him going. Finally, after weeks of hard work, Rafael began to see the first signs of transformation. The care teams were reinforced, and Marcelo, though initially hesitant, took on coordinating the efforts more effectively, ensuring every patient received priority and respect. Laura, still recovering, watched with pride as Rafael's commitment took shape. The hospital, which had once been just an institution, was now becoming a true symbol of hope and care. And she knew that, regardless of the challenges, their journey had created something larger than they could have ever imagined. A few weeks had passed, and the hospital was unrecognizable. The atmosphere was different, as if a renewed energy had filled every ward and hallway. Rafael walked through the building, observing the changes that, little by little, were coming to life. He greeted nurses, doctors, and patients, feeling that there was finally a spirit of cooperation and humanity in a place that had once felt so cold and distant. As he entered one of the newly restructured wings, he saw Marcelo supervising a team of nurses. Marcelo looked lighter, with an expression Rafael had never seen before, something between satisfaction and pride. Noticing Rafael approaching, Marcelo turned and smiled. "Mr. Rafael," Marcelo said, extending his hand. "I have to admit, I was skeptical, but I can see the changes are making a difference. The team is more motivated, and patients have already noticed the extra care we're giving." Rafael shook Marcelo's hand, feeling a mix of gratitude and fulfillment. "Thank you, Marcelo. I know it was a challenging transition, but you did an excellent job leading these changes. This is the hospital I always dreamed of." Marcelo nodded, clearly moved. "I never thought I'd see this kind of transformation. Thank you for inspiring me to change my perspective." Rafael gave a slight smile before continuing his walk through the hospital. As he passed through different departments, he saw small signs of change. A waiting room with more comfortable chairs, nurses offering water and attention to patients, and even a new sign at the entrance reading, "Care and Dignity First." Finally, he made his way to the room where Laura and the baby were. Laura, who still needed some rest and care, sat beside the crib, watching their son with a look full of love and pride. When she noticed Rafael's presence, she turned to him, smiling. "Look around us, Rafael," she said softly. "This hospital is now a place where people can feel safe, where they're respected. And it all started with you." He approached, taking her hand and kissing her gently on the forehead. "Laura, you've always been my inspiration. This whole process, I could only keep going because I knew I had you by my side." She smiled, feeling deeply connected to him in a transformative way. "And I'll always be by your side, Rafael. What you've done here is greater than anything we could have imagined. It's a legacy, something our son will see and be proud of one day." At that moment, a nurse entered the room to check on the baby. She exchanged a respectful look with Rafael, as if now he was not only the owner, but someone the team trusted and looked up to. "Mr. Rafael," she said as she adjusted the baby's crib, "the nursing team would like to thank you. We know you faced many obstacles to bring these changes, and for us, it means so much. We're caring for people in the way we've always dreamed." Rafael nodded, moved. "I just wanted everyone here, both the professionals and the patients, to feel valued. Each of you is essential to make this place truly humane." After the nurse left, Rafael turned to Laura and sighed. I never thought this path would bring so much learning. I came into this thinking success was about numbers, about recognition. But today, I understand that true success is having the courage to care for people. Laura smiled, her eyes welling with tears. You found your purpose, Rafael, and that's more valuable than any other achievement. They remained in silence for a few moments, immersed in the realization of everything they had endured and achieved. The baby, nestled in the crib, stirred slightly, and Laura watched him with a heart full of love and gratitude. It was as if that tiny life symbolized the start of a new era, not only for the hospital but for them as a family. In the days that followed, the hospital staff organized a small ceremony to formalize the changes. Rafael, Laura, and the baby attended as guests of honor, and employees from all departments gathered to celebrate the hospital's new phase. During the ceremony, Marcelo gave a brief, emotional speech, thanking everyone for believing in the change and highlighting Rafael's role in leading the transformation. When Rafael was invited to speak, he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility and gratitude. Today, we're here to celebrate a new beginning, he said, looking at everyone present. This hospital, which once was just a place for medical treatments, is now a place of human care. Each of you contributed to make this possible, and I am eternally grateful. At the end of the ceremony, Laura approached Rafael, smiling. You did it. You turned a dream into reality. And that's something not everyone can do. He embraced her, feeling her warmth and reassurance. And I could only do it because you believed in me. As the staff celebrated and the hospital buzzed with renewed energy, Rafael and Laura knew they had planted the seeds of something enduring. The journey had not been easy, but the emotional impact of each obstacle and triumph had transformed them forever, and they were ready for any future challenge together. A few months after the hospital's restructuring, the impact of the changes was unmistakable. The once quiet halls now echoed with the warmth and humanity of a welcoming space. Patients, staff, and doctors began to feel they were not merely in a medical facility, but in a place where each person was treated with dignity and respect. In the main hallway, a new plaque had been installed. It read, Rafael and Laura Hospital, a commitment to life and human dignity. This plaque symbolized more than just a tribute to the couple. It was a representation of the promise Rafael had made to Laura, now forming the foundation of every action taken there. Rafael walked through the hospital, observing every detail with a blend of pride and gratitude. He felt that all of it served a higher purpose, something beyond financial success. Approaching a waiting room, he saw a group of nurses talking with patients and noticed a difference in each of them, more attentive, present, and aware of the value of their work. When he arrived at the room where Laura was with the baby, he found her holding their son, whispering softly to him and rocking him gently. When she saw him enter, she smiled, and he walked over, leaning down to kiss her forehead. How's our little heir? Rafael asked, joy lighting up his eyes. Laura laughed softly. He's well, and from what I see, so is his father. She looked at him with affection and pride, knowing he had undergone as much transformation as the hospital. Rafael sighed, feeling the weight of what they had built together. Laura, I could never have done this without you. Everything we've achieved here, it's our legacy. This hospital reflects who we are and what we believe in. Laura nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I believe the true legacy isn't just in the walls, the equipment, or the finances. It's in the people we touch, the lives we change. Every patient who walks through here, every staff member who dedicates their time to caring for others, carries a piece of our purpose. Rafael sat beside her, gazing at the baby in her arms and feeling the depth of Laura's words. She had always known how to see beyond the material, to grasp the essence of what truly mattered. You're right. Our mission is so much greater than I ever realized. It's about leaving a better world, and that starts with every life we impact here. As they spoke, a young nurse entered to hand Rafael a report. He thanked her and noticed an expression of admiration on her face. Mr. Rafael, I just wanted to say, working here has changed my life. Seeing what you and Mrs. Laura have done for this hospital inspires me every day. Rafael nodded, moved by the nurse's words. I'm glad to hear that. This hospital belongs to all of us, and each of you is an essential part of this change. The nurse smiled, expressing her gratitude before leaving, and Rafael turned back to Laura, his expression serene and emotional. You know, Laura, I used to think all I wanted was success. But today, I see that true success is about leaving something meaningful behind. Something that makes a difference. Laura held his hand, agreeing. And you've done that, Rafael. We've done that. This hospital is proof that love, care, and dignity are values that transcend time and hardship. They sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the present and the future, with the certainty that they had planted the seeds of something lasting. The hospital, once just an institution, had now become a genuine refuge, a place where every patient found hope and every staff member found purpose. Looking at the baby in her arms, Laura smiled, feeling that, in some way, the hospital's new phase was also a gift for him. Our son will have an example of what it means to fight for what's right. And I know he'll grow up proud of what we've built together. Rafael leaned down, kissing the baby's forehead gently. May he know that the world can be better, Laura. That he always remembers, no matter how hard it gets, it's always possible to make a difference. They shared that moment in silence, knowing that while the path had been difficult, the result was a legacy greater than they could have dreamed. Every sacrifice, every tear, every challenge had been worth it. As the sun began to set over the hospital now bearing their names, Rafael and Laura prepared to face the future with hope, ready for the next chapter of their lives, knowing that, no matter what came, they would always have each other and the purpose that bound them. After all the challenges and sacrifices, Laura and Rafael transformed the hospital into a true symbol of respect and humanity. Laura's suffering and the birth of their child marked the beginning of a new era, where every life is valued, and each staff member feels part of a greater mission. Rafael learned that true success goes beyond numbers and contracts. It's in people and the positive impact we leave behind. This couple's journey reminds us that, even in the face of adversity, there is always hope for a new beginning, and each of us has the power to make a difference. Subscribe and leave your comment on the importance of fighting for dignity and justice in our everyday lives.